Did you know your auditory cortex can only actively process about 400 spoken words a minute?
Oh, right. And after that, it essentially just starts deleting incoming information, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It literally initiates this forced data dump just to survive, to prevent a complete cognitive crash.
Which is terrifying, really, because the moment most people sit down for a high-stakes language exam, what do?
Right. They try to force their brains to process, retain, and simultaneously transcribe double that capacity.
It's a biological impossibility, which entirely explains why so many test takers feel completely shell-shocked by the time that final audio track finishes.
That feeling, that absolute survival mode, is exactly why we are pulling apart the TOEFL IBT listening section today.
Absolutely. We have a rather massive stack of test prep material, cognitive research, and structural breakdowns in front of us.
We really do. And our mission today for you, the listener, is to take you out of that defensive survival mindset. We want to put you on offense.
Spot on. We are looking at a testing landscape that is, quite frankly, begging you to take control.
So, welcome to the deep dive. We are building a championship game plan to help you master advanced conversational English under pressure.
And the architecture of this specific test makes it a rather brilliant laboratory for this. The TOEFL listening section utilizes authentic North American, British, and Australian accents.
Which I love because, hey, listen to the two of us.
Exactly. Our little transatlantic dynamic here is the perfect training ground because the test is designed to reflect the true, messy, overlapping reality of a global university campus.
Yeah, you aren't listening to robotic, perfectly polished dictation.
Not at all. You are listening to human beings who hesitate, self-correct, and, well, change their minds mid-sentence.
Which means the strategies you use to pass, like a standard high school vocabulary quiz, are going to completely fall apart here.
Oh, straight away. They won't hold up.
So we are going to focus entirely on two powerhouse strategies today: dynamic note-taking and active predictive listening.
Brilliant. But before we build those up, we really have to tear down the single biggest mistake people make.
Oh, the big one. When that audio starts playing, your immediate instinct is to go verbatim.
Yes, the verbatim trap.
And just so we're all on the same page, verbatim means writing down every single word exactly as you hear it.
It is the ultimate cognitive trap. When
Yeah.
you attempt verbatim transcription, your working memory it bottlenecks completely.
Because your hand is cramping up trying to capture every syllable.
Precisely. Your brain shifts entirely to the mechanical motor function of moving the pencil across the paper. You lose all semantic processing.
Wait, semantic processing meaning you stop actually understanding what the words mean.
Exactly that. You are functioning as a human dictation machine. You capture the individual vocabulary, but you completely destroy your ability to comprehend the actual meaning of the lecture.
I used to think of it like trying to catch every drop of rain in a storm.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. But based on the cognitive research we're looking at today, it's actually more like being a court stenographer when you're supposed to be a forensic sketch artist.
Ah, yes. Because the stenographer writes every word but couldn't tell you what the suspect looks like.
Exactly. A sketch artist is capturing the shape, the profile, the defining features. But here is my concern, and I see this all the time when I'm coaching students.
What's that?
If they aren't writing down the words, what exactly are they supposed to be doing with their pencil? They're terrified that if they don't capture the words, they won't remember anything.
It's a completely rational fear, but it stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of how memory retrieval actually works in a testing environment.
Okay, break that down for us.
You do not need the exact words to trigger the memory. You need the structural relationship between the ideas. And this is where dynamic note-taking comes in to replace that verbatim trap.
So how do we do it? What's the play?
Instead of writing full sentences, you document the architecture of the speaker's logic using shorthand.
Shorthand, let's define that real quick. Shorthand is using shortened versions of words or simple symbols to write faster.
Quite right. You're employing these symbols and spatial mapping to represent much larger complex concepts.
So if I'm listening, instead of writing out, the professor stated that the new environmental policy caused an increase in local temperature.
Which would take far too long to write.
Right, so instead I just draw an upward arrow next to the letters ENV and TEMP.
Precisely. You create a highly personalized visual language. But the shorthand symbols are really only half the battle here.
Okay, well, what's the other half?
The true power lies in vertical mapping. As the audio progresses, you structure your notes down the page to track the speaker's dynamics.
I love this part. It's like building a ladder.
It is. If a lecturer introduces a core claim, You write your symbol for that claim on the far left margin. Then, when they introduce a supporting example, what do?
You indent your notes slightly to the right, right underneath it?
Exactly. And if they introduce a contrasting theory, you move back to the left margin.
You are literally drawing a visual hierarchy of the audio.
You are building a blueprint of the argument as it happens. So when you look down at your paper, you don't see a dense, unreadable block of text.
Right, you see a clear map showing that point A led to example B, which was contradicted by theory C.
Spot on. And because you have that visual structure, it instantly triggers your semantic memory of the lecture.
Okay, I love the blueprint concept. That's a huge shift in strategy, but that brings up a really massive variable.
Let's hear it.
Human speech isn't just data transfer, right? If we are mapping out the structure instead of the words, what exactly are we listening to?
The source material we have from the test makers emphasizes that authentic audio uses something called acoustic features to convey meaning.
Acoustic features. Sounds very technical.
It does, but it just means that human speech is incredibly messy. We rely heavily on conversational hesitations, self-corrections, sudden intonation shifts.
Like vocal stress patterns, right? When someone emphasizes a specific word.
Exactly. These acoustic features are critical because, in natural speech, how someone delivers a phrase often completely overrides what the phrase looks like on paper.
Oh, totally. Like when someone says fine, but you know they are definitely not fine.
Precisely. A speaker might utter a sentence that appears entirely neutral in a transcript, but a drawn-out vowel or a heavy, exhausted sigh.
Reveals an unstated frustration.
Yes, or an implied opinion that becomes the exact subject of a high-difficulty test question.
Which leads directly into the concept of tracking the pivot. This is such a crucial play to understand.
Let's define that for the listeners.
So a pivot is when a speaker suddenly changes direction or topic. It often flips the entire meaning of the conversation.
Yes, they might be agreeing with a colleague's premise, and then bam, acoustic shift happens.
And they pivot to a devastating counter-argument.
Recognizing those pivots is truly the difference between a mid-tier score and a top-tier score. Let's look at a factual example directly from the ETS source material.
Yeah, let's get into the weeds here.
There is a practice module featuring a campus conversation where a woman invites a man to join an art contest. She is praising his past creative efforts, trying to persuade him.
Classic university scenario.
Quite. Now, he does not respond with a straightforward, literal refusal like, no thank you, I have too much homework.
Right, because nobody actually talks like that in real life.
Instead, he replies using humor and metaphor. He tells her that his schedule is a masterpiece of chaos right now.
A masterpiece of chaos. Man, that is a great phrase.
It is highly evocative. But think about the cognitive gymnastics required to process it under pressure. The listener must recognize the pivot.
Because he's socially matching her topic, right? He uses an art-related word, masterpiece.
Exactly. But acoustically, his delivery of that humorous phrase masks his true intent. He is politely but firmly shutting down the invitation.
The humor is just a social diffusion tactic.
Spot on. He is pivoting from the topic of art to pinpointing a fundamental problem with his workload.
Wow. So if you were stuck in the verbatim trap, frantically writing down the word masterpiece,
your brain might literally interpret that he is excited to create a masterpiece for the contest.
you would get the exact opposite meaning because you process the vocabulary instead of tracking the pivot.
It's brilliant test design, really. Let's examine an even more subtle example from the text.
Let's do it.
This is from the Listen and Choose a Response task type. A man says to a woman, "Would you mind giving me a hand arranging these desks before the lecture begins?"
Okay, stop right there. Let's look at that. On paper, grammatically, that is a direct yes or no question about her internal state of mind. Would you mind?
It is phrased as an inquiry into her feelings, yes.
But pragmatically, socially, and acoustically, it is absolutely not a literal question about whether she has an emotional objection to desks.
Not at all. It is a request for immediate physical labor. The pivot the listener must track here is understanding the implied social contract.
I see.
The underlying meaning isn't about her feelings, it's an action prompt.
Right, so the correct response has to match that action prompt.
Exactly. If a multiple choice option says, "No, I don't think the lecture will be very interesting," that is a trap for someone translating literally.
Because they heard the word lecture and jumped on it.
Yes. The correct answer has to be an offer of assistance, such as, "Oh, sure, let me grab that chair." You must decode the intent, not the syntax.
But hold on, let me stop you there and push back on this a little bit.
Go ahead.
Because practically speaking, this sounds exhausting. If I am a test taker and I'm managing the extreme anxiety of a timed exam,
Which is considerable.
very considerable, how do I tell the difference between a speaker just taking a deep breath to oxygenate their brain and a major game-changing pivot?
Ah, yes.
Am I supposed to hyper-analyze every single time the professor clears their throat? Because that feels like a recipe for a panic attack.
That is a brilliant point. And if you were only analyzing acoustic features in a vacuum, you would absolutely drive yourself mad.
Thank goodness.
You don't listen to a sigh in isolation. You contextualize the acoustic feature with the structural progression of the talk.
Okay, so map that out for me.
A throat clear in the middle of a sentence is just biological. But a heavy sigh, followed immediately by a shift in the hierarchy of your shorthand notes.
Like, say, moving from a supporting detail back out to a main claim.
Exactly. If the sigh aligns with a structural shift on your map, that is a confirmed pivot.
Okay, that makes sense. Which brings up a massive gap in what we've covered so far.
Oh.
Yeah, because even if I have a great shorthand blueprint and I'm actively listening for sighs and shifts to confirm these pivots, I am still playing defense.
I see what you mean.
I am waiting for the speaker to do something, and then I am reacting to it. Isn't there a way to stay ahead of the audio? Can I play offense?
You absolutely can. And this is where we transition from merely taking notes to our second powerhouse strategy, active predictive listening.
Active predictive listening. I love the sound of that.
It changes everything.
Yeah.
You stop being a passive receiver of the lecture and become an active interrogator of the speaker's intent before they even finish their sentence.
Okay. And the prep material actually gives a really intense, specific drill for training this skill. It's called the SMART Tip Protocol.
Yes, it's quite rigorous.
It really is. So when you are at home studying with mock audio tracks, you are supposed to literally pause the recording midstream.
Just hit the space bar right in the middle of the professor's sentence.
Right. And force yourself to predict out loud what the very next point is going to be based on the structural indicators you just heard.
It is one of the most effective ways to build neuroplasticity for a new language. You force the brain to anticipate rather than just translate.
And the mechanism that allows you to make accurate predictions relies entirely on latching onto something called signposting statements.
Which is a crucial term for our listeners to understand.
Definitely. Let's define it. Signposting statements are essentially transition phrases. Words like consequently, furthermore, nevertheless.
Or functional phrases like let's examine how.
Exactly. They act like architectural indicators, telling you exactly what room of the argument the speaker is about to walk into.
They demarcate categorizations and procedural phases. Let me give you an example.
Hit me.
If a biology professor begins a segment by stating, there are 3 primary mechanisms driving this cellular mutation.
That is a massive, unmistakable signpost.
It is. As an active listener, you immediately map out 3 distinct branches in your shorthand notes before the professor even names the first mechanism.
Because you have predicted the structure.
Precisely.
But wait, let me raise a tactical concern here. Predicting structure sounds great, but what if I predict the content wrong?
How do you mean?
Let's say I hear the word however, and I actively predict the professor's going to say the chemistry experiment was a total failure.
Right.
But then she actually says the experiment was a huge success, it was just too expensive to repeat. Doesn't my prediction just totally corrupt my understanding of the audio? I've essentially written a fake lecture in my head.
This highlights a critical distinction that many students get wrong. Predictive listening is absolutely not about guessing the facts before they are spoken.
It's not.
No, it is exclusively about predicting the shape of the argument. You are not placing a bet on whether the experiment succeeded or failed.
Okay, so what am I doing?
When you hear the signpost, despite the team's rigorous preparation, you predict that a structural complication is imminent. You know the next element will contrast with the preparation.
I see. So if I hear the professor say, let's take a look at, I am not frantically trying to guess whether she's going to talk about a frog or a bird.
Exactly.
I am simply predicting that an example is coming. My brain prepares to receive an example, and my hand prepares to indent my shorthand to the right, tucking it under the main concept on my map.
Spot on. You are tracking the logic, not fortune-telling the facts. You are constantly asking yourself, is the speaker expressing a direct point right now, or are they setting up a comparison?
It's almost like you were building the bookshelf, and then you just let the speaker hand you the books to put on the shelves.
That is a brilliant analogy. When you anticipate the structural container, the facts just drop neatly inside. You are never caught off guard.
Now, to be able to catch all these signposts and acoustic features, there's another layer we need to talk about. The test uses really specific conversational language.
Yes, the idioms. They are everywhere in these authentic academic talks and campus conversations.
So let's do a rapid-fire idiom breakdown. We've got 3 essential test talk phrases that listeners need to master.
Let's run through them. I'll take the first one. Have you ever heard someone say they draw a blank?
Oh, all the time. To draw a blank means suddenly being unable to remember anything or think clearly. Your mind just goes completely empty.
Exactly. And the test application for this is crucial. If you draw a blank on test day while looking at a question,
Which happens to the best of us.
it does. But what should the listener do?
You cannot dwell on it. You use cognitive focus isolation to eliminate the obvious errors, guess, and immediately move forward. Do not let one blank destroy your momentum.
Fantastic advice. All right, what's the next idiom?
The bottom line.
Ah, a classic. The bottom line refers to the most important, fundamental point of a discussion.
Yeah, skipping past all the fluff and getting to the core issue.
And how does this apply to the TOEFL?
It perfectly connects to answering main idea questions. Listeners have to distinguish between an interesting supporting detail and the absolute bottom line message the speaker wants to convey.
Precisely. If it's just a detail, it isn't the bottom line. And what's our final idiom?
This is my favorite one. A piece of cake.
Meaning something that is very easy to accomplish.
Exactly. And I am enthusiastically reassuring you, the listener, right now, if you map out those speaker dynamics and you avoid verbatim notes, finding the correct multiple choice response will become a piece of cake.
It really will. It shifts from being this agonizing process of elimination to something ridiculously easy.
Because you aren't guessing. You are just looking at the answers and finding the one that perfectly matches the blueprint you've already drawn.
It fundamentally changes the testing experience from one of panic to one of absolute empirical clarity.
So let's bring these massive concepts together and issue a final verdict for the listener.
Let's do it.
We've torn down the verbatim trap. We've built up dynamic note-taking with shorthand, and we've layered on active predictive listening using signposts and acoustic pivots. How do these exist together in the reality of the exam room?
You should view them as an integrated filtration system. They rely on each other entirely.
Okay, how so?
You use active predictive listening, interrogating the audio via those signposting statements to know exactly what is important enough to keep. That is your filter. It catches the structure and discards the fluff.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Then you use dynamic note-taking, your shorthand symbols, and your vertical mapping for exactly how to capture that filtered information quickly without overloading your working memory.
The prediction tells your brain what matters. The shorthand gets it onto the page.
Precisely.
That is the ultimate championship combination. You are no longer scrambling to catch the rain. You are charting the weather system.
I love that.
You are armed with the top-tier strategies to decode human intent, bypass cognitive overload, and pull the bottom line out of any dense academic lecture they throw at you.
Absolutely. And before we conclude our deep dive today, I want to leave you with one final, deeply fascinating implication drawn directly from the test's underlying algorithm.
Oh, this is the good stuff. Tell them.
The source material outlines that the TOEFL reading and listening sections operate on a multi-stage adaptive testing model.
Meaning the test is actively judging you and adapting its own difficulty based on your performance in real time.
Precisely. Your performance on the very first test module directly determines the complexity and the scoring weight of the questions you are fed in the second module.
Wait, really? So the beginning matters more?
It sets the baseline. So ponder this. Since the algorithm is judging your competency immediately, mastering these active listening techniques in the very first 5 minutes doesn't just earn you a few points.
It literally alters the entire trajectory of the exam.
It does. Your ability to drop the verbatim trap and lock into signposts on track number 1 dictates the mathematical ceiling of your final score.
Wow. It emphasizes how your initial focus possesses the power to shape your entire testing destiny.
The stakes in those opening minutes are incredibly high. But the beautiful thing is, you now have the exact architectural tools to control them.
You really do. So the next time you sit down, the clock starts, and that first audio track hits your ears, remember, don't write the words. Map the intent. You've got this.